Hey, how y'all doing? It is fabulous to see you again and so soon. I promise that we are back to our regularly scheduled program. I swear. I swear. I'm already gearing up to record my next big series. I was going to try and fit another small video into the schedule before, but I decided because I'm in charge here that that's simply not going to happen. I'm just going to move ahead and we'll see. I'm getting ahead of myself like always. Like always. Anyway, today I have another fashion deep dive for you. We are going to be talking about a fashion designer that we lost quite recently and who I didn't know much about beforehand. I mean, I knew who he was and some of what he did, but I didn't know everything. So today should be interesting and a learning experience for all of us. If you couldn't guess by the title, today we are going to be diving into the legacy of the legendary streetwear designer, Virgil Abloh.
The whole idea is to tell stories, to open up doors for others, to hopefully change the landscape of art. That's what motivates me.
He left his imprint. I mean, it's a shine.
Like my last video, today's video will be different in terms of format because I'm more so going to be working in chapters because Abloh did so much in his life and there wasn't really a way for me to fit everything into the story cohesively, hence the need for chapters so I don't miss anything. But let me set the scene. The 90s and 2000s were a time to be alive. In regards to fashion, it was wild and ever-changing, with houses like Gucci and Louis Vuitton and designers like Tom Ford and Marc Jacobs dominating the industry. They were the moment. They still are. They altered the world of fashion. Tom Ford brought sex and power to the runway with his illustrious slinky dresses with provocative cutouts and seductive and suggestive ads, while Marc Jacobs brought art and streetwear into the world of luxury high fashion with his collaborations with Takashi Murakami and Steven Sprouse. However, the streetwear he adopted at Louis Vuitton was still a far cry from what was actually going on outside the world of luxury fashion. I'm talking low-rise jeans, baby fat, juicy couture sweatsuits, rock-aware, blinged-out flip phones. Artists like Jay-Z, Destiny's Child, Pharrell, and the up-and-coming Kanye West were on the rise making names for themselves. They were on MTV, where they were decked out in luxury designer fashion while partying or traveling and drinking Cristal. It was a movement, and a powerful one at that. And it was in this environment and time period where the foundation of Virgil Abloh's youth was established. Those fundamental years influenced him tremendously. As he grew up, his inspirations ranged from hip-hop to classical art. Nothing was exclusive, and everything could be connected back to Virgil's love of breaking down the conventions of what an artist is capable of. And as a child, Virgil watched a lot of TV. He was obsessed with all things pop culture and waited for the day someone would show him the ropes, how to make it, how to come up. But no one did. And there was this singular moment he remembers vividly, a music video starring Pharrell in Tokyo, where he thought to himself, I originally wanted to go into music, but now I'm interested in this random thought of being in Tokyo one day. And it was in that moment he knew no matter what he did in this life, he would someday go to Tokyo and everywhere else thereafter. In that moment he knew he would get to where he wanted to go, and he would pave the way for young creatives like himself, those sitting at home with the same inspirations and no figurehead to lead them. He would cultivate a generation of dreamers who refused to be limited by society's standards. Virgil Abloh was a trailblazer, an outsider in the fashion industry who went on to make a name for himself at his own label Off-White and as creative director of Louis Vuitton. He broke down barriers in the fashion industry and brought forth hype culture to the luxury market. He became one of a few black designers to ever take the creative helm of a major luxury fashion house, opening doors for creatives, offering them information and guidance, and an opportunity to launch their own brands. Some called him the Karl Lagerfeld of his generation, a creative genius who was business savvy and had a superhuman energy within him. Bernard Arnault of LVMH called him a genius, a visionary, a man with a beautiful soul and great wisdom. But in order to better understand who Virgil Abloh was, we have to start at the beginning. So let's do this. Virgil Abloh was born September 30th, 1980, to Nee and Eunice Abloh, Ghanaian immigrants who raised their children Virgil and Edwina in the northern suburb of Rockford, Illinois.
Grew up in Rockford, Illinois. It was amazing. I felt like I was just an average kid from the middle of nowhere.
As a child, Virgil was taught by his mother how to sew, as she believed you don't buy clothes, you make clothes. And while Virgil knew how to make his own clothes, he never felt this was something he could do with his life, with his future, or for the rest of his life. He felt that a random black kid from the suburbs of Chicago shouldn't be doing something like that. So he put more of his time and attention into DJing, hip-hop, and skateboarding. At 17, in 1997, he began DJing house parties under the name Flat White.
Yeah, when I grew up, Chicago is the backdrop. Wow, it's like, just an American kid that loved radio, loved the idea of music and sharing music, but I was born in 1980, so of course I've missed like a golden era, so to speak, but it's in the air, it's in the water, and the idea of electronic music that I was hearing on the radio would have like an hour throwback of like classic house tunes. So I knew them just because that was in the atmosphere. Sort of my friends are, at this point I'm like a skate kid, so it's like we're listening to rap and rock. But then as I got older and into DJing, of course you go to the record store, Gramophone Records in Chicago is what, is my hometown spot. But you just see different sections of different genres, and you couldn't help but sort of be like, oh, let me like pick out a few records that I'm knowing they're on the radio, but I could buy into that. And so for me, it was about being a proper DJ, which is mixing different genres and presenting music in different contexts. So that's reminded me of an era that sort of has coexisted in our current club culture of the kids and crew that I run around with.
That same year, he attended a high school soccer game where he met the woman who would become his wife, Shannon. The only problem was that Shannon had a boyfriend. However, a week after the soccer game, Virgil Abloh put 2 dozen roses on her car with a letter explaining why she should dump her boyfriend and date him instead. And I guess it worked, because she did. They dated throughout the remainder of Virgil's senior year and decided to stay together while Shannon finished out her senior year of high school, and Virgil went on to attend the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And when Shannon graduated, she also attended college in Wisconsin. She knew him long before he was Virgil Abloh, the fashion designer. She knew him when he drove a green Honda and wore Junko jeans and Ralph Lauren polos. She knew him through and through. And hopefully this video gives all of us a better idea on who he was as a human being. Because Virgil Abloh, the fashion designer, doesn't even begin to touch his legacy. He did a lot of things in his short life, and being a fashion designer was just one of them. In college, he majored in civil engineering and dreamed of building skyscrapers.
Basically started, my parents are from Ghana and West Africa. They did the hardest part of that show, or my journey is, which is putting me in a place where I could sort of flourish. They could raise a kid with opportunity. And so, I took advantage of that when I was a teenager. And then my dad said, I always wanted a son as an engineer, and I'm the opposite of like a rebel type. So I was like, that's the least I can do for you making that stride from a third world country to, it's like, you're gonna get a son that's an engineer.
He even started a blog called The Brilliance, which focused on fashion and design. In his final year, he took an art history class that focused on the Renaissance period and artists like Caravaggio, and it really inspired everything for him. With Abloh saying, "It flipped my head backwards. I'd spend so much time thinking practical things, and it had changed his perspective. He knew he could do more." And he would. In 2002, he graduated with a degree in civil engineering and moved to Chicago to attend the Illinois Institute of Technology for his master's. And when he graduated in 2007, he began sending t-shirt designs to the Chicago print shop Custom Kings, where he would eventually land a job. And it was there he met Don C., a Chicago streetwear designer who also happened to be Kanye West's manager and an executive at his label. Don C. saw Virgil's potential and set him up with a meeting with Kanye West. And that is how Virgil Abloh came to work with Takashi Murakami for Kanye West's Glow in the Dark tour merch and the 2008 graduation album cover. The pair would work together forever, and it was the beginning of a lifelong friendship and collaborative partnership.
Man, that brother, he inspired me so much because it was at a point in time where me and Ye came up together. So I'm very protective of him. So when we met Virgil, it was like a refreshing breath of air of somebody that was creative, that we could build with, that we wasn't trying to sun. But you feel like, oh man, it's somebody genuine that's interested, but man, he trying to add some value to what's going on. So that's the first cue I tell everybody. That's how Virgil got in. He came in adding value right out the gate. Yo, I'm creative, I'm an architect, I'm formally trained, I want to design, I'm hungry, how can I help design? Where Virgil was like, yo, I come from the point of view of somebody trying to get around that's positive, and that's not always a negative thing. And so that's what Virgil something I want to encourage everybody to kind of follow his work ethic, his eagerness to always add value, And I mean, he was uber talented too. So that's the first thing, get your skill craft like tightened. You got to sharpen your sword before you go out for battle. So this man's sword was the sharpest.
Right,
you know
exactly.
what I'm saying? So I think he fostered a whole wave of kids that are now the leaders of culture.
Exactly.
The pair bonded over their love of fashion and their dreams of breaking into the luxury high-end fashion world. For 2 years they worked together, and neither one of them knew how to make clothes by hand, so they worked primarily with Photoshop. And Kanye West said that Virgil Abloh was the fastest person in Photoshop he ever knew.
My name is Virgil. I'm gonna show you around a little bit, just a little bit of the neighborhood. We're in Wicker Park, Bucktown. We're gonna hop in and out of those little streetwear kind of spots and show you what's going on. Right now we're in St. Alfred's. It's like, premier shop to get all your kicks, to get all the latest t-shirts and all the latest fashions, the new eras. It's all here.
But this wasn't enough for them. So in 2009, they took steps towards their future and attended a 9-month intensive internship at Fenty, where they were learning the ropes and fetching coffee. And Virgil wouldn't know this until much, much later. But it was the energy and mindset that he brought into the Fenty studio that caught the attention of CEO Michael Burke. Now, Michael Burke would steadily follow Virgil Abloh's career for the next few years. Even after he was appointed chairman of Louis Vuitton, Michael Burke kept an eye on Virgil Abloh, a definite foreshadowing of what was to come. But after Fenty, Virgil Abloh worked on Kanye West's albums My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and Yeezus, as well as Watch the Throne, the joint album between Kanye West and Jay-Z. The project emphasized an obsession with high fashion and boasted about living a luxurious life as a black man juxtaposed against the romanticized idea of Paris. The album actually secured Virgil Abloh a Grammy nomination, so he's Grammy nominated. In 2012, when Kanye formed Donda, Virgil Abloh was brought on as creative director, and he was so instrumental to the company, his initials were printed on the sock liner of the Nike Air Yeezy 2 sneakers. Through his friendship and partnership with Kanye West, Virgil Abloh was able to meet and befriend other artists like Kid Cudi and 2 Chainz. He directed A$AP Rocky's Fashion Killer music video and Lil Uzi Vert's XO tour life. His connections brought him into an inner circle that gave him a chance to thrive, a chance to participate, and that motivated him to create a dialogue between high-end fashion and streetwear, because streetwear influenced him more than anything. And in other good news, in 2009, after almost 12 years together, Virgil married Shannon, and the pair would go on to have 2 children, Lo and Gray. Then in 2011, he launched Pyrex Vision, with the goal of representing the youth movement.
To me, the first creative gesture was always skateboarding or graffiti. Pyrex Vision was sort of our early phase of making art. The intent was a film. It was, a group of kids invading lower Manhattan and sort of making it the sort of city they saw. And that was mixing established designers with streetwear brands that were sort of owners of their own space, but the combination made something new. So it attempted to document that sort of pivotal moment in culture at the time.
With his first collection, he released a 10-minute short film on his work, the inspiration being the stigma that impoverished areas are filled with drugs and basketball. So we put them together. Pyrex was often the container used to cook drugs, and the number 23 referenced Michael Jordan, the star of the Chicago Bulls, hence Pyrex 23. He bought up dead stock polos, flannels, and shirts from Ralph Lauren and printed the words Pyrex 23 on the back in an Edwardian text that was the only text available on Adobe for free. And he sold each piece for around $550. And with that kind of markup on dead stock apparel, critics obviously ate him alive because he didn't create the clothes. He simply screen printed 5 letters and 2 numbers on the back. One critic said, with a limited run of shirts and the nominal cost of screen printing Pyrex 23 on the back of each one, it's highly possible Pyrex simply bought a bunch of rugby flannels at retail no less, slapped Pyrex 23 on the back, and resold them for an astonishing markup of about 700%, which is exactly what he did. And it sounds absurd that anyone would spend almost $600 on it, but this was the beginning of the hype culture, that is. The kind of hype that made people spend $600 on a Ralph Lauren shirt with Pyrex 23 on the back. And Virgil knew that it was simple to remake his pieces, but he also knew that if he got the right people to wear his work, others would buy them for any price. And those who were inspired by his work and couldn't afford $600 could easily remake one for less. The tourist versus the purist. We will talk about this idea as we move through the story, but this was really the beginning of the concept of the tourist versus the purist. This was his audacity and his embrace of humor and irony. And he wasn't wrong. Rich people will buy anything that makes them look and feel exclusive. However, Virgil closed Pyrex Vision a year later, claiming the work was intended to be an artistic experiment and not a commercial enterprise. It wasn't a failure, because it did create the hype he was looking for. And that is what inspired him in 2012, alongside Heron Preston, to create Bin Trill, a brand focused on being authentic and working hard. They wreaked havoc on the fashion world with their lo-fi streetwear and Rocky Horror-esque logos and graphics, and again, it was very controversial as the prices were wildly marked up, with the cheapest thing being shoelaces that were $100. But the reason the brand survived as long as it did was they leveraged their connections with celebrities to amp up hype. Celebrities like Kanye West, Drake, Big Sean, Rihanna were all wearing the brand. But Bin Trill would die off, and not because of the prices, but because they lost their exclusivity. In 2013, they partnered with PacSun, and this hurt the brand's image because it instantly became less exclusive and less high-end. Bin Trill lost the celebrity cachet, and this is a shameless plug right now, but if you watched my last video on Halston, you would know that when he collaborated with JCPenney, this same exact thing happened. People like their boundaries. People like exclusivity, not accessibility. And this is just another great case study on how a hype brand could easily fall apart. But this isn't Halston's story. Halston was an entirely different time period. And thank God Virgil Abloh was able to bounce back. Because we would not have what we have today if he wasn't able to bounce back. He learned a lot from the Bin Trill mishap. So when he launched his own label a year later, he made sure to keep the high-end exclusivity. He launched what he called his faux luxury label Off-White, called Off-White because it was the gray space between black and white, thus an off-white color. But it was really a reminder to Virgil to always compare, the shorthand between luxury and streetwear where he decided to work from.
Feedback toward me was like, oh, there's room for a new type of fashion design. And with that, I started Off-White as the seasonal fashion sort of language concept post this idea of streetwear, this idea of fashion looking for a change. I see the term streetwear as more of a catchphrase to define a way of making than, you know, what people might determine it as like a style of clothing.
Off-White is sort of my resume and mood board for an actual idea that I have for like the modern luxury brand. For me, it's like my teenage years is the foundation for everything that I've sort of done afterward. I was like an average sort of suburban kid that was skateboarding, listening to Nirvana, Beastie Boys, rap, Wu-Tang. Like you say, the music, you can think of a look. And so as I started thinking about clothing, I was always like drawn to what my initial interest was, and that was t-shirts. For Off-White, my contribution was I would take a young idea of streetwear, this idea that t-shirts and hoodies are important, but making that in the same factories as luxury houses. I feel like Off-White might be one of the truly first sort of like luxury brands that's been just built from social media. It behaves in this sort of hybrid in between a traditional system and a new system, as in streetwear. That clothes just come out at different times, they're posted on Instagram and consumers can buy them. And I'm interested in that hybrid in between them both. You know, I'm directly pointed at this generation that hasn't been messaged luxury to yet, as an Off-White sort of look.
It's all like an open book diary for me to be myself. You know, I'm just a kid from the US skating. That's like where I came from. Me and my friends, we participated in streetwear for like the 3 or 4 life cycles of it. I grew up printing my own t-shirts and giving them to friends for their local skate things. And then that era was dead. Supreme is my Louis Vuitton. This to me is a Margiela of its time. There's no stylist. We style ourselves, whatever feels comfortable. But then who's going to be designing, who of that generation of all these t-shirt brands is actually going to parlay and play with capital F fashion so that they respect it. Out of all that, I wanted to do Off-White. I'm just a creative person, and I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by people that are 10 times more creative than me, 10 times more of a visionary than me. I know that the kids beneath me, they're visionaries before their time. I don't revolt against anything. The only thing that I work against is the fact that no one told me I could do this as a job. So the rest of my career is like showing kids like, yeah, you can do it too. Like there is no wall. You know, it's a generation of us. And I think the one thing that brings us together is that we just want to push culture forward and have a say in what goes on.
Off-White's end goal was to modernize fashion and steer these long-standing houses in a new direction. It was an evolution from Pyrex, using the same diagonal stripes and logo placements, with the big difference being quality. Off-White's design aesthetic was centered on diagonal lines and the iconography of American cities. White arrows, plain labels, industrial packaging, which explains why Off-White used quotation marks, zip ties, capital letters, and caution tape. The quotation marks were used to draw attention to social norms and challenge one's perception and assumptions.
I say that all getting to the idea of quotes. It's the ability to say two things at one time. The crescendo is after, a lifetime of learning and sort of the push and pull of how pop culture dictates taste.
He included zip ties to allow customers the ability to customize their pieces at home, adjusting components to make them unique to the wearer. Virgil loved creating dialogue and having people question his work. All of his work ultimately comes back to the organized, spatial, and lofty thinking he learned as an architect. That training never left him and was a major part of his work, inspired heavily by Caravaggio and the 20th century German design studio, the Bauhaus.
100%. So I studied engineering, then got a master's degree in architecture. And I explain to people it's like how the world works in a way. It's like an analytical thinking, like how do you make a building stand up? But then there's the yin-yang part of it. It was like, what does the building look like and what does it do? How does it perform? Why is it relevant? So it's analytical plus like aesthetic. And I use that in fashion design or in my art practice.
Are you a researcher?
Yeah, because what we're living now has already sort of been lived before us. The metaphors are like numerous.
Ironically, quotes, my real profession is architecture. A lot of people quote my career. It's like, oh, you didn't go to fashion design school. But I went to architecture and I make architecture in my fashion design studio. That's quintessential like drifter outfit where, the world is at their fingertips. It surrounds them. It's present in their being no matter where they are.
After a few collections, Off-White quickly caught the attention of Paris, China, Tokyo, and the US. Off-White spoke to the teens and the rich kids of New York, Milan, Paris, and Tokyo, pop stars, rappers, and much of high society's elite. In 2014, Off-White was selected by LVMH to be a finalist for the LVMH Award. In the end, he lost to Marquise Alameda and Jacques Mus. But this didn't stop Off-White's success. In fact, it only exploded from here. Soon after, he was collaborating with everyone including Moncler, Levi's, Warby Parker, and Chrome Hearts. And actually, when he started Off-White 3 years earlier, he called a friend and said, I started this brand a couple days ago, and I have high hopes. I want to collaborate with my 3 favorite brands. And just 3 years later, he had fulfilled those dreams, working with Moncler, Levi's, and Chrome Hearts. He very quickly took Off-White to new heights, proving that he learned from his past mistakes and would build the same hype around his brands that others like Supreme had done so well. In November 2017, Virgil had the biggest collaboration of his career with Nike. So let me backtrack a little bit. Virgil Abloh met Fraser Cook in 2012 while he was DJing, and the pair actually kept like a close eye on one another, but it wasn't until Virgil Abloh's spring 2017 Off-White menswear collection, when he debuted a collection of Umbro sneakers, that Fraser Cook knew he needed to get Virgil Abloh into Nike Studios. He saw those sneakers and he knew they needed to work together, and that is how Virgil Abloh got a meeting at Nike headquarters. But Virgil Abloh knew he wasn't going to be leaving without making something, saying, I didn't wait all these years just to have a meeting with Nike. So he rebuilt a pair of triple black Air Force One lows using an X-Acto knife and Sharpies, exposing the inner foam on the tongue, putting a silver swoosh with thick obvious stitching, and a text in nod to the shoe's origins. This experimentation is what led to the reconstruction of 10 of Nike's most popular models. The collection came to be referred to as the Tens, reimagining how the iconic sneakers looked, and it was one of the fastest collaborations ever put out by Nike. For him and many others, Nike was larger than life. As a teenager in Rockford, Virgil and his friends used to sketch shoe ideas and mail them to Nike. I guess a lot of people did that in the 80s and 90s in Chicago under the domination of Michael Jordan. It's no surprise, Chicago and the surrounding suburbs were enamored with Michael Jordan and Air Jordans. Michael Jordan was larger than life. He was their Superman.
I'm recalling an emotion of these 90s Bulls and Jordan himself. The way that he put his style together was formerly like a first sort of like fashion icon for me. Even when you look back at the color, of the red Bulls jersey and just the icon of the logo of the warm-up jersey, to me is a one-to-one sort of Superman cape. But, obviously the shoes are the root of it all. There was a tremendous amount of mystique and, it's the birth of sneaker culture in itself. When your team is on a championship run and you have a Superman figure by the name of Michael Jordan, like the air was different. There was this like transcendence that, you know, the everyday life of our city was changed because they were on this like feat of humanity. He did on the court, proved the impossible. You know, in these shoes and this level of design gave him the confidence to succeed. This epicenter came from hitting that game 6 shots. Everything that I was doing as a teenager, I was looking into the TV screen to sort of draw inspiration from Michael Jordan. If this guy is proving that you can win with style and grace, you know, by being determined and working hard, I'm literally going to apply that to my life as a designer. Jordan has magic in those shoes. When you put those shoes on, I don't care what you are, who you are, you felt like you could tap into Jordan himself.
He defined Virgil Abloh's youth. His entire design background and ethos came from the 90s, but Abloh was never really a sneakerhead. While he admired Michael Jordan and sketched shoe designs, he was known for always wearing the same pair of sneakers until they fell apart. He believed shoes were meant to be worn, to look used and loved, and that is what the Tens collection felt like. The collection was designed as a reaction to what he saw as the too perfect microwave feel of brand new Nikes. He described the battle he felt against the purists who keep their sneakers pristine and uncreased, and the tourists who felt out of place. He didn't want sneakers to feel brand new. He wanted them to have the same soul as a battered pair of Air Force Ones from 1985 that were loved through regular use. Abloh took the just do it mentality and applied it to the wearer, with Abloh saying, "I spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about the kid in the middle of nowhere who has a passion for design, much like I did. He or she needs a path like this to understand design. And it's important, even with established pieces, that you keep the fire alive and try not to be too precious about things. That is why he never approached sneakers as objects you put on shelves. They were meant to be worn, toyed around with. He wanted you to feel like you could go to the store and gather up tools to make your own at home. Because you could."
There was one moment where one of them mentioned that there's an airbag and he didn't believe it. So they opened it. Virgil pierced the airbag. And then that was a moment when he was like, we need to display or document this innovation on the shoe somewhere.
If there was a spark of an idea, it was like, see it out, try it out. And if there was like one little iota of an idea and 90% of it was trash, but there was like a little bit that could be something, it was always like, go for it, try it. We would always start with this vision of what we're going to do. And then it would go here and there and take a right turn and flip around. At some point, we would just like go, okay, that's it, freeze it.
And this concept, what Abloh referred to as his 3% rule, did generate a lot of conversation and contention. Because the 3% rule was that a new design can only be created by changing the original designs by 3% and no more. He described this approach as an ironic detachment that allowed him to copy and paste, to take and reapply.
I have my sort of like 3% approach. Right now, I'm only interested in editing something 3% from its original form. I'm basically tired. I might be too old, but I found that I'm like, things are intriguing to me when they're like slightly edited.
And it obviously caused some controversy because it can feel like he's plagiarizing, right? Like in 2019, he was called out for creating a scarf that closely resembled one that Kirby John Raymond of Pyre Moss put out in 2018. And it was around this time that many began to question if Virgil Abloh was the designer or creator of the next generation, or if he was just friends with Kanye West. And I don't know, that's not for me to decide, but I definitely would love to know what you think in the comments. But we're moving on. After Nike, Off-White went on to work with Rimowa, Cha-Cha Matcha, Mr. Porter, Cha-Cha Matcha, Mr. Porter, and then in November 2019, he collaborated with IKEA. The collection was inspired by Virgil's childhood relationship with furniture, from building it himself to the chair he grew up with. About the collection, he kept asking himself, do we need another chair in the world? Another rug, another table or bag? When does one make the conscious decision to buy a coffee table? He reimagined what people were putting into their homes, and it was thrilling. He said there was a romanticism to it, a lastingness. He knew architecture was more than just providing furniture. It was about creating pieces that work for real people. And the collection had the same off-white balance as all his work did. Like the giant rugs he made, which made him laugh because he had no idea who had the luxury of needing a rug that big. But he also loved the idea that even though it was a rug, you could still hang it on your wall and it would look like a cool art piece. And that was his talent. It was in the subtle details where his work really shines, like this chair, a signature piece in his mind that could be both generic and very specific. But he attached a doorstop to the leg, which made it look so generic but off at the same time. as well as a grass green rug with the words wet grass on it, an IKEA receipt rug, and a Baroque rug with the words keep off, which I think is really funny, as anybody who knows, like, who has grandparents and they're always like, don't sit on the furniture, get off the rug. It's funny. There was also a clock with no numbers, just the word temporary, and a brown reusable IKEA bag with the word sculpture on it. After IKEA, he worked with Nike and Air Jordan on a capsule collection, and in November 2021, he worked with Mercedes-Benz on Project Maybach, redesigning the Maybach. And it's probably the coolest car I've ever seen. It had solar panels on the hood, which made it all electric and self-charging. And it's his collaborations where he, as an innovator, really shined. But he also did design some really cool collections for Off-White, so let's talk about some of them. In spring 2018, Off-White produced a collection inspired by Princess Diana, as it was right before the 20th anniversary of her death.
I want to make a modern version of her wedding dress. I like this. I like seeing the shoulder. I love this idea that Off-White can go from like a study on graphic t-shirts all the way to a wedding dress under this sort of muse that I've dictated for the season. This current collection that I'm developing, choosing Princess Diana as the muse, is sort of this resonance. It's always what I wanted to do, and no one does it. Couture meets street, but people say it all the time.
Princess Diana was the muse for modern dressing. She could go from formal to casual, with Abloh saying she inspired him because she was a strong individual, that despite her position, she had her own personal taste and it came through in her clothes. There was no stylist at play here. Her personal taste was very out of the way from what she was supposed to wear. It was an inspiration to him. So he presented 40 looks in tribute to Princess Diana during Paris Fashion Week. Obvious references to her signatures, which were updated and infused with streetwear, like strings of pearls, heavy jewel earrings, strong shoulders, polka dots, gloves, biker shorts, and Jimmy Choos. It was also that same year, in 2018, 2 months before Kim Jones announced his departure from Louis Vuitton, that Virgil Abloh was in Paris signing a deal with LVMH. And actually at Kim Jones' last show, he made an obvious reference that we all missed. He stepped out in a pair of Virgil Abloh 10s. And 5 months later, it was announced by LVMH that Virgil Abloh was going to be the artistic director of menswear for the Louis Vuitton ready-to-wear line. And that made him the first black designer to head the brand's line, and only one of a few at the helm of a major French fashion house. He got the job because he dreamed it, willed it, and knew it would happen someday.
I dreamt about it. I willed it into fruition, thinking that it can happen and doing everything in my power to sort of make it cross
and make it manifest.
I can name instances 8 years ago that were part of this process. Or I can name instances 8 months ago that were part of it. And I think it's a metaphor for anything that one wants to do in life.
Even though Abloh was never traditionally trained, he knew he didn't have to be because he was covered in other ways. He was always influenced and driven by fashion, always the little kid who peeked through storefront windows. And he reminisced about the first time Kanye West got him into a fashion show for Comme des Garçons, but they were still treated like outsiders. People wondered who they were and why they were there, but it was their way of saying, we want to participate, we want to be a part of this, and we aren't going anywhere.
So this particular show, Comme des Garçons, that photo then began to rule the internet. This is before social media is fully ramped what it is now. That was us sort of saying, hey, we want to participate in this arena.
Virgil Abloh knew he didn't look like other designers, and sometimes his confidence did waver, because he thought he could never truly be a designer.
I did not ever think that I could be a designer with a capital D, because no one looked like me. I was like, I'll never get the capitalization. I might be a designer, but I might do it and do another career, because I was like, I don't see people that look like me. I have to get struck by a certain type of lightning to get that sort of epiphany to be someone to tap me with a wand and say, you're a designer, let alone
So he spent months researching, feeling a pressure to do right by his own standards.
I had done a number of months of research, just even while I was preparing for the job, I was working on it. And to me, what struck me is I went to the archive and you have the original trunks. Then you have Marc Jacobs' whole collection. Then you have Nicolas Gasquet's whole collection. Then you have Kim Jones and all the things in between. And they're allowing me to place my full collections in the same archives that go back to 1854. So that to me, you can't erase that.
No.
And so, for them to sort of say, appointing me seems like news, but that is a longer,
That's legacy.
Yeah, and I want us to be remembered. It's been my goal.
For Virgil Abloh, it was an honor to accept the position because he found the heritage and creative integrity of the house as key inspirations. When he stepped into the role, his office was the same one as Marc Jacobs. And just like Marc Jacobs, Abloh was coming in at a time when he could reinterpret the brand into the modern era. And he too wanted to carry on the tradition and hoped to change the industry, making it more diverse and open-minded. He was proud. The job gave him reason and depth. It made him feel like a kid living in Alabama who never thought something like this was possible. They could now do something like this because of him. He saw this as an opportunity, a beacon of hope, as his legacy, and he wanted to make sure his work had an impact. From his perspective, he was trying to stand up for this generation of youth, and he wasn't going to waste it. However, Virgil Abloh is just like the rest of us, flawed. A human being at the end of the day who makes mistakes. So before we talk about his time at Louis Vuitton, I want to discuss some of the controversies surrounding him, because it can be hard to see where he stood on many important issues. Virgil Abloh, as a designer, as a person, stirs a lot of debate for many reasons. One being his design approach, the others being his stances on important issues in the world. Like, he designed t-shirts for Planned Parenthood and actually collaborated with Jenny Holzer on shirts that were pro-immigration and anti-neo-nationalists. But he vocally supported Ian Connor, a violent rapist who was accused of assaulting more than 20 women. And it just doesn't add up. You can't claim to support women and then protect a serial rapist and continue to invite him to be a part of your space. It's despicable. It's unforgiving. It's ridiculous. That to me is the worst controversy. But he did get caught in another in 2019 during the George Floyd protest against police brutality. And it was actually kind of like a snowball effect. It all started when he posted an Instagram story for his donation of $50 to a local bail fund called Femme Power, a queer collective that provided money and legal aid for arrested protesters. He faced backlash for many reasons, the main one being he donated so little when he obviously had money. Some people even joked online about how shocked they were to find out that they had actually donated more to bail funds and they were unemployed or making minimum wage, while others criticized his donations when his keychain sold for 2 times that amount. It got so bad that he had to put out a statement saying that he had actually donated over $20,000 to bail funds and organizations and would continue to donate more. But it just got worse, right? As protests erupted in every major city, including LA, New York, and Chicago, some caused looting of major storefronts, including Virgil Abloh's friend, Sean Witherspoon of Round 2 Hollywood. Now, Round 2 Hollywood documented the damage on Instagram after the break-in, and Virgil Abloh commented saying, "This is fucked up. You see the passion, blood, sweat, and tears Sean puts in for our culture. This disgusts me." To the kids that ransacked his store and RSVP gallery and all other stores in our scene, just know that product staring at you in your house or apartment right now is tainted, and a reminder of a person I hope you aren't. We're part of a culture together. Is this what you want? When you walk past him in the future, please have the dignity not to look him in the eye. Hold your head in shame. There was so much backlash to this, as expected, and probably as you can imagine, that he wrote an apology the very next day. "I apologize that my comments yesterday appeared as if my main concerns are anything other than full solidarity with the movements against police violence, racism, and equality. I want to update all systems that don't address our current climate. Yesterday I spoke about how my stores and the stores of friends were looted. I apologize that it seems like my concerns for those stores outweighed my concern for our right to protect against injustice and express our anger and rage at this moment." A lot of people were left unsatisfied with his apology. They felt they couldn't stand behind him after what felt like a disingenuous message. And it's hard to really argue with that since the post has been taken down. It's been down for years. It's almost like his team, LVMH, his brand, like everybody is trying to erase this part of his history. But I think it's important to remember it because a lot of times people make apologies and they don't back it up, right? However, I do think that it's everything he did after this that shows that he was trying to make up for his words and actions. So let's start talking about his Louis Vuitton collections because you'll see as we go through. In his first show at Louis Vuitton, he posted on Instagram saying, "Like some kids today, I started the surreal mission of fashion school, but a blank t-shirt, a screen-printed idea for it, and a dream. As a nod to that, on every seat is a graphic t-shirt I made the early days at Louis Vuitton once I learned how to use the photocopier in the office." He put these t-shirts inside transparent tubes, and his show notes included each model's birthplace and that of their parents, calling it a global view on diversity linked to the travel DNA of the brand. At the show in the front row sat Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, Travis Scott, Rihanna, A$AP Rocky, Takashi Murakami, Bella Hadid, and so many more. The show was titled "We Are the World." It aimed at rebooting the brand for a new generation, featuring a diverse cast of models in an all-are-welcome any color, nationality, identity, and generation. He normalized diversity without making it feel so fake or forced. He used models as people, saying, not only are they dark-skinned, but they're all artists and friends. I now have a platform to change the industry with this show, so I should do that. It's not a secret. We're designers, so we can start a trend. We can highlight issues. I'm interested in using my platform as one of a very small group of African-American males to design a house to show people in a poetic way. The models are artists first. The collection was inspired by the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz, focusing on displacement and referencing the American dream. The theme of displacement is symbolic of the new world Virgil walked into, his boundary-breaking journey from Rockford, Illinois, to Paris. The entire show was down a yellow brick road filled with seafoam greens, poppies, and emeralds. The show closed with a metallic silver poncho that read, "Follow the yellow brick," telling the youth to follow him, to make their own road.
And you have words, you know? There's certain shows that like stand out for various reasons. And I feel like, you know, that show or Vuitton Men's was one of those like special category. Well, Kanye was the guy when it was completely unpopular that said, I am not to be typecast into a box. He willed it for us, you know, like go back. He was like, we're going to Fashion Week, this place that we can't get in. That dream is his just as much as it's mine. In my dream, it was him down the runway. The one thing that has to be stressed about that show is that it actually wasn't me on the runway. You know, it was the community. That show was us, you know, and that link wouldn't have happened unless, you know, I acknowledged that Kanye stood from a mountaintop long ago and yelled, saying, the future of fashion will be like this. So I wanted the world to see that the guy who fought for this moment is a part of it and is uniquely linked to, you know, me doing it.
The collection was an explosion. It was for both the purist and the tourist. The tourists who were the kids who loved Supreme and streetwear, and the purists, the kids who grew up in the streets. And Virgil always found himself somewhere between both, and used where those two poles meet to define his work.
In my eyes, it's an art movement, less a fashion trend. I decided my fingerprint was how the work is positioned, you know, and I use this overriding sort of construct between tourist and purist to sort of categorize the type of work that I'm trying to do. You know, purists can find value in meaning based on an underlying premise, whereas like a tourist has curiosity, ambition, and is willing to sort of seek out, to sort of, you know, pacify that need to see something or to know about it. So, you know, I like to make work that attracts both.
Celebrities like Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, and Timothée Chalamet were some of the first to wear his work on the red carpet. And if you remember, they actually sparked some confusion because Michael B. Jordan and Timothée Chalamet were seen wearing these sparkly harness-type bibs. Some called it a bib, others called it a harness. Virgil came out and said it was actually neither. He called it a mid-layering garment. It didn't provide comfort or security. It was more so about feeling empowered. And I absolutely love them. There isn't ever a lot of variety or diversity when it comes to menswear. And these are just spectacular. I need more people to wear like mid-layering garments. I need more people to try and like show off with menswear. That first collection made Abloh feel like he had just graduated school. It was just the beginning, and now the real body of work could begin. That first show removed the glass ceiling. He was now established.
I honestly feel like I just graduated like school, master's program. You know, now is the beginning. Now is the body of work starts. I look at the show just the other day as my first show, you know, and I now have to sort of remove that block, that glass ceiling of like perception that I had for myself. Like, you can't be that.
You're in it.
So now, and then we're the establishment. Like we can, I will no longer be referencing the old days and then the barrier to entry, because through our hard work, we've sort of made a landscape that we need to sort of like move forward. Let's make the world that we wanted to see. And we possess like an enormous strength. So like, I'm legitimately like, who can we empower next? You know?
For his fall 2019 collection, he dedicated the show to Michael Jackson, but without making it feel too theatric and costumey. He wanted to use Michael Jackson as a backdrop to make a point about putting humanity at the forefront, with the bigger question being, why are we making clothes? This is menswear, but what makes up men and menswear? That's what he really was getting into, elevating everything through a new prism. And he looked at it through fine tailoring. The set was a New York sidewalk from the Billie Jean music video, and Jackson's influences were seen throughout. In his Off-White Spring 2020 collection, he collaborated with Futura. Virgil really wanted to work with Futura because for much of his life, Futura's work was seen as vandalism rather than artistic expression. And he wanted to say that whether a painting on the side of a subway or in a museum, all art was worthy.
My obsession with brand, or sort of trying to understand brand or who was behind it. A lot of my fine art is about demystifying and communicating, again, to a tourist and a purist. These powerful, loaded images are in some ways more impactful to society than, quote unquote, art or, anything else. I don't feel responsible to a preconceived notion of art. I feel more responsible to a community that is trying to change the tide, or to sort of live in an optimistic society that art, design, music, and fashion actually change the world for the better.
In his Spring 2020 menswear collection for Louis Vuitton, it was actually supposed to be held at the Notre Dame, but the fire ended that dream, so he shifted to the cobblestone streets and cafes on the Place Dauphine. He gave the audience a chance to sit under the trees and sip champagne. The DIY invites could be turned into kites, allowing everyone, especially men, to remember the fun of boyhood. Virgil Abloh was inspired by the nostalgic summer days of childhood, and the carnival-like set included an Instagram bouncy house castle, a crepe stand, mini Eiffel Towers, and soap-blowing bubble machines everywhere. Some models even carried red LV balloons on the runway with them, and it was supposedly a nod to the film The Red Balloon, about a little boy chasing a balloon around Paris. Abloh saw this as a metaphor for his new career at Louis Vuitton. However, the collection really drew inspiration from the beauty and intricacy of flowers as a metaphor for diversity, as they grow around each other and aren't segregated in nature. The collection felt much more couture than the last two, and it proves that Virgil was learning, adapting. He was not going to stop or slow down. And we can see that in his Off-White Fall 2020 collection, which was a mix of Virgil Abloh, Nike, and Arc'teryx, a collection referencing Victor and Rolf and Tom Ford at Gucci. The collection juxtaposed technical, sportswear, and street gear. There were even references to the cutout white slinky dresses that Tom Ford was known for that were also inspired by Halston and Elsa Peretti. How many times can I drop that shamelessly throughout this video? Twice. I promise it's only twice. Anyway. In his next collection in January 2020, Virgil Abloh delivered yet again. The collection, titled Heaven on Earth, was an explosion. The set was blown up LV tools, scissors, spools, and a tree that hung from the ceiling. It felt like a dreamy childhood spent cloud gazing. Invitees were given an LV clock set to run backwards, as if to say you can't get time back, and you shouldn't waste it. And in what would become one of the last collections of his life, we can now see how Virgil Abloh was looking at death. This collection was set in the clouds, and it could have been his way of dealing with his pondering thoughts of heaven and the afterlife. The kites could symbolize the end of boyhood, while the LV clocks that were gifted to guests that wound counterclockwise could be his way of saying, if only we could go back in time. All suggesting he was reconciling with his failing health and what he would leave behind. In July 2021, it was announced that LVMH had bought up a 60% stake in his namesake label Off-White. Michael Burke of LVMH said the sale was to ensure the company's future, and it also meant that Miss Abloh and their children would be taken care of. There was an obvious foreshadowing to his failing health, but also if you've heard about Off-White in the news lately, we'll get to it. That same month, Virgil Abloh showed his first collection in 16 months. It was beautiful. Laboratory of Fun opened with Bella Hadid in a blue velour mini dress with matching knee-high boots. Others followed with inside-out seams and maxi-length coats. To contrast the bold colors were houndstooth check patterns on bucket hats and tops and multicolored prints on shirts. But the real message was clear. Off-White was heading to high-end luxury status among the likes of Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Prada, Celine, Givenchy, Balenciaga. Or at least they were. That's debatable today. I'm getting ahead of myself again. And then in what would be his final collection at Louis Vuitton, Virgil showed Ebonics, snake oil, the black box, mirror mirror. The collection was a mix of poetry and intellectual purpose of Black consciousness, taking its rightful place in society, with Virgil saying it was about taking down the walls, unraveling the mysteries as Black people, as trans people, as marginalized people. The world is here for our taking, for it takes so much from us. It was a true exploration of his heritage and what it means to be at the pinnacle of a career in Europe as a Black American creative director. Growing up, Virgil Abloh's father always wore traditional kente cloth to family weddings, funerals, and graduations, while Virgil always attended in a suit. So for this collection, he merged the two together. Celebrating his Ghanaian culture, he focused on his favorite topic, boyhood innocence, the grace period before the awareness of social cultural biases set in.
Fashion isn't about the clothing, it's about the picture that's painted, about how clothing can reinforce or destabilize prejudice. And that's the collection. That's the culmination of all the ideas and the life lived.
The show featured a 14-minute film noir performance inspired by the essay Stranger in the Village by James Baldwin, in which he writes about his experience living in a Swiss village and his life in America as a Black man. The film follows American rapper and actor Saul Williams as he moves through an abstract green marble city, cautiously shuffling through a crowd of people representing the artist, salesman, architect, and drifter. The video critiques the archaic social norms while examining the presumptions we make about people based on the way they dress, their cultural backgrounds, gender, and sexuality. And the collection had everything. African-draped wraps, kilts, Western hats. But for me, it was at the end with his 3D sculptural cityscape jackets that Virgil Abloh truly shined. These jackets were mocked endlessly by the press, but I loved them. The two jackets contained iconic architectural landmarks that Virgil Abloh admired as an architect. The first jacket, you have to accept my apology now. I only took French for a little while in my life. I am going to try to say these correctly. Bear with me. The first jacket had the Eiffel Tower, the Centre Pompidou, the Arc de Triomphe, the Pantheon, the Louvre, and the Notre Dame. The others had landmarks in New York, the Bank of China, and the Hancock in Chicago. The entire collection returned to his 2018 slogan of tourist versus purist, which, again, is his organizing principle. For him, a tourist is someone eager to learn, who wants to see the Eiffel Tower when they come to Paris. And the purist is the person who knows everything about everything. For Abloh, he is both the outsider who became the insider and the man with the power to bring young people with him into the former exclusion zone of high-end luxury fashion. While riding the high of his life and career, Virgil Abloh was fighting a quiet battle. A battle he sadly lost on November 28, 2021, when it was suddenly and shockingly announced that Virgil had passed away in Chicago after a private battle with cardiac angiosarcoma, a rare cancer that took his life at 41 years old. His wife Shannon said, "Something you have to understand is there wasn't a plan. It wasn't like we knew that he was going to pass. Even though we knew the challenge of what he was fighting, it went a lot faster than we thought it was going to. So we never had the, this is the legacy that I want you to work toward discussion. But because I was with him for so long, I knew every inch of him. I knew every inch of his brain." 2 days later, to honor his passing on November 30th, 2021, Louis Vuitton showed the final collection Virgil Abloh had worked on, in which he said felt like writing a book, one continuous story about diversity and design, all synced up with his thoughts on culture, creating a world he wanted to live in. It was called Amen Break, and it was inspired by an original drum beat recorded by the Winston in 1969, which became the most sampled drum beat ever. Virgil found the idea profound, how something can be used by so many artists and so many songs to the point where it blends away. So he decided to join the conversation on hacking, source sharing, and copying by writing a 40-plus page show notes on the history of Black culture, music, and style in America in the 70s and 80s, and how it all started there. He organized the whole concept around the game of chess, the idea that two entities are always in battle. In Virgil's show, it was the clash between high fashion and streetwear, between culture and fashion, like how his love of hip-hop and the Wu-Tang Clan brought the knowledge and influence of Japan and China into his youth. And then on December 6, 2021, Abloh's family and close friends attended his wake on a cold, cloudy winter morning in Chicago in the glass atrium of the MCA. Virgil's spiritual advisor, Pastor Rich Wilkerson Jr., who Abloh had met after his diagnosis, had opened the service. Now, Wilkerson Jr. had actually helped Virgil in his final years come to terms with the work he would be leaving undone and behind. as well as the life he would be leaving unfinished.
Virgil, he's strong and he is resilient. I'm not that interested in how a man behaves on the mountaintop. It's much more interesting to discover who a real man is when you watch him in the valley.
Just do what he'd say. Do more. He was always in your corner. That's how he lived his life. If he had an idea, he never second-guessed or thought twice. He just did it and kept it moving.
Virgil, you are the glue that brought everyone in this room together. All these different people, colors, ages, backgrounds, religions, all came from one man. And that's what he did. He brought like the illest people together. He did what he knew he could do and did not care what anyone thought he couldn't do.
Now today, we recognize that Virgil is in eternity. We celebrate that. So we give you praise and we give you glory. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
And while I did plan to speak on what Off-White is doing today, it was just announced 2 days ago. Okay, so I'm filming this October 2nd. It was announced 2 days ago, yes, on Virgil Abloh's birthday, September 30th, that LVMH had sold its 60% stake in Off-White to Blue Star Alliance, the company that owns BB, English Laundry, Brookstone, and Hurley. Bernard Arnault, owner of LVMH, said the company was the perfect partner to carry that legacy forward. And now, it's no surprise that Off-White has been struggling since the loss of Virgil Abloh, but it seems that sales haven't been doing so well. No financial information was disclosed, nor were the terms of the buyout. I would be interested in reading that. It hasn't come out yet, but this isn't what shocks me. The sales isn't what shocks me. What shocks me is that LVMH suddenly sold Off-White after only a few years of owning a major stake in it. I mean, maybe we could argue or say maybe that Off-White team wanted to find new backing and leave LVMH. But if you know anything about LVMH, even if you don't, they are a huge conglomerate. They don't give anything up. They take. They take like a greedy little child. They take and they take and they take and they take and they take. Nothing is enough for them. And I don't think that they would give anything up just because you ask them to. It's really weird to me. At some point I'm going to talk about Gucci, and when I do, it's a doozy, let me tell you. But LVMH is a really shady company. They always have been. But it's dirty work to announce the sale of Virgil Abloh's company on his birthday. You know what I mean? It's dirty. Like, I do think they announced it during New York Fashion Week to kind of hide the news, to dilute the damage. In other words, to bury it. But on his birthday, LVMH doesn't do anything without like some ulterior motive. They like did it to like hurt him or like hurt his legacy or hurt his name. Like, they don't do anything just because. Nothing they do is just because. All this chaos leaves Off-White in this really weird place right now. It makes you question if Off-White can truly live without Virgil Abloh to provide that center of gravity, that spark. And it makes you question if hype culture is dead. And if so, how will Off-White continue to make noise? I don't know. I have my own thoughts on this. Personally, I am not invested in hype culture. I don't like it. I stay away from it. So I probably won't speak on that now, but I do think it's obvious that like hype culture is dying. I think people are trying to shift away from streetwear, but again, this is up for you to decide what's what. Even if Off-White doesn't live forever, Virgil Abloh's memory will. I still think it's shitty that LVMH sold his company on his birthday, or announced it on his birthday, but his legacy is going to live on forever. His work lives in the archives of Louis Vuitton forever. You cannot take that away. In 2019, he had an exhibit at the MCA that showed his clothes, media, and graphic designs, and he specifically opened the exhibit in Chicago because, as he said, it needed to happen with a collective feeling and a community, and there's a strong one here. You also look at the history of this city and the World's Fair, which obviously had a huge impact on Chicago back in the day. It was a frontier city, and that's why a lot of architects, like Miles van der Rohe, were attracted here. We want to put it on the map again. With this exhibit, like the LV pop-up in the West Loop, which was the first LV pop-up ever in Chicago. And that I knew because I'm from here. And I will say, his legacy feels so deep here. It feels like so ingrained and so rich. Because he did so much for Chicago, for the people here. You know, he represented us in a space where we're not ever really represented. And that meant a lot. Virgil Abloh sought to solidify himself among the likes of Steve Jobs, Karl Lagerfeld, and Michael Jordan, who are household names because they dedicated themselves to their practice.
I've had the fortunate ability to sort of craft my own path. You know, people ask me all the time, do you feel some sense of like achievement or fulfillment? And the answer is zero. There's no feedback loop that's like, yes.
And that's how Virgil Abloh lived, working tirelessly like an addiction. There were times he could be in 2 to 3 cities on the same day, sometimes cities on different continents.
I travel probably like 320 days a year, 8 flights a week. Chicago, Frankfurt, Milan, London, Berlin, Stockholm, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Vegas, and LA. It's a lot. I work on the street, literally, like phone in hand.
I do what I do because I feel I'd die if I didn't. I feel like I'm not doing anything in a way too. It's like I'm not working, I'm not stressed out, I'm not, it's not my nature. I just have this like desire to make things.
He longed to build a structure for the 17-year-old version of himself, so every project and collaboration celebrated his youthful curiosities. That's why nothing stopped him. He pursued all areas of interest, including music and DJing, which saw him play festivals like Lolla, Tomorrowland, and Coachella. And not only was his work meant to feed his younger ambitions, but to fuel the battle again between the tourist and the purist. The tourist being the members of high society serious establishment, which Abloh now saw himself a part of, a group he didn't feel he belonged to. But his disruptive spirit was always to help the purist, those who truly understand the younger generation, who could learn from him and get past the cultural gatekeepers, and to not get discouraged by the first no you hear, and to think of it as a good sign that will help you achieve a second good idea. For example, he loved the idea of the wheel and a doorstop. How when you think of the best invention ever made, many will say the wheel, because it's used for all types of travel, which can take you places. However, these little doorstops can completely render this great invention from going anywhere. Another one of his Ablohisms was to question everything. He often told people that you need to find a new space, another crescendo of design. Get your brain to do something different and often, because asking questions gets to the root of everything. The reason for things to exist, saying, we're thinkers, we challenge these generational decisions and have to therefore question, does every output need to exist? And it's okay to say no and move on.
As an architecture student, like I had a professor that said I didn't have the pedigree or ideas or skill set to sort of work in any sort of important context. So every no is perfect for me. I thrive off a no.
If you ask my friends, I think all I do is ask questions. I ask questions with an opinion. I always have like my opinion, and then I like pose either rhetorical or the antithesis just to sort of catch a wave of what someone else's opinions might bring. Sort of my creative process is entirely in question form.
His biggest life lesson was realizing it was okay to not be perfect, because showing his work was just as important as the work itself.
The process and the end product are equally valuable. I embrace imperfection as much as I embrace the pursuit of perfection.
If you couldn't snag a pair of off-white Nikes, you could get spray paint Sharpies and zip ties and make a pair of your own. That is why his sneakers came with extra shoelaces, to give people who had them the ability to turn any pair of sneakers into an off-white design by replacing their own shoelaces. It is again the internal battle between the tourist and the purist. The tourists, those willing to spend the money, and the purists, those who started it all, who don't have the money to drop on $200, $300 sneakers, but are the culture. Which is why his work existed in luxury fashion and streetwear. His official sneakers were difficult to obtain with the hype attached to them. But exclusivity was never the point. The point was to close the gap. He didn't see a reason for there to be a gap between black designers and Europe's fashion elite, between luxury and skateboarding. For him, there was no reason for a gap to even exist.
It's to inspire kids. If you think Off-White's too expensive, that's great. You're supposed to make your own t-shirt brand. This project that was made to inspire. To people that can't see it, it looks like something else. It's targeted towards the demographic that can afford it. But for that demographic that can't afford it, it's meant so that you start the competing brand that's better than Off-White.
The purist obviously knows the whole history about everything and tries to keep this sort of sacred space so that dialogue can be had. But the other faction is like the tourist who's like, intrigued. You know, like they're going to be right there listening to the conversation. You know, it's fashion world, and then it's the newcomers. You know, they're intrigued, they're gaining knowledge, they want to come in with an open mind. They either preserve their tourist mindset or they adopt into a purist, but those two factions make up the community.
His work in Paris with Louis Vuitton and in Italy with Off-White created a space for Black artists to sit front row at European fashion shows and open the doors for those who feel like they can design fashion and one day have their work on the runway. As a first-generation Ghanaian American, he was a trailblazer, an outsized figure in the fashion industry, preferring to see himself as a creative maker as opposed to simple titles like designer, DJ, or artist. His work represents a highly American tale of improbable work-driven success mixed with celebrity proximity and luck. He knew you couldn't predict what project or idea would lead to success, but not to overthink it, because his random sweater with a simple photo and lettering propelled his career. So it is important to not force anything, to just let it exist, because it will all eventually lead you on your path. All the work Virgil Abloh did led somewhere, and all those paths led to him working at Louis Vuitton 10 years later. He knew everything he did, from working at Custom Kings to launching Bin Trill and Pyrex 23, got him there.
The brand Off-White exists just because it was like a case study within myself to say, hey, if I don't make this one graphic T-shirt, then all this would be a runway show in LA, Tokyo. There wouldn't be. It was just a decision of making one graphic T-shirt that was like sold at Colette like 8 years ago, but it was like a domino effect.
As soon as I got on campus, I said to my friends, my community, I was like, I'm only going to put 50% of my effort into school, quote unquote school, and I'm going to raise my interests up 50% to actively treat them equal. That's when I started DJing. That's why hip hop and music. I was like, that's not low. That's not what I do outside of school. That's what I do. That's what I'm into, skateboarding. And literally, to get to where I'm at today, if I hadn't spent so much time on that other 50%, being curious about art and learning things that weren't on my curriculum, that's why I travel. That's why I don't see a limit between Paris and Chicago. It's like, I live here, but no, that's not, there's no limit. And I think that young people, I know it's hard. It's lofty goals to be like, don't believe in, abolish the stereotype and don't believe in the box that they put you in. But life is so short that you can't waste even a day subscribing to what someone thinks you can do versus knowing what you can do. And that's like the switch.
So say what you want about Virgil Abloh and Off-White, but there is no denying that he opened the doors for people of color in an industry that didn't want them there. And it's sad to see someone who worked so hard, who never took a break, to be taken so soon, and his legacy to be sold off so quickly. It's incredibly hard to sit here and just imagine all he could have done if he only had time. Okay. So that is seemingly all I have for y'all today. I really enjoyed researching Virgil Abloh, as I'm from Chicago and have always admired his work. I saw the pop-up. I always kept trying to find the CTA train carts, but I never got to ride on one. I only ever saw them in passing. I never really looked into the true meaning behind his work and his life because, again, hype culture and streetwear weren't my forte. However, I do think he was just a wonderful person, a flawed human just like the rest of us who are learning every day how to be better and do better. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you all again very, very soon for the start of my next series, which is going to be huge. Bye.
What is your reference? What is your inspiration? In fashion, these are the questions we crave answers to. But what happens if your starting point has no reference?
I just want to make sure that the door is open for a room of these kids to feel like they can design fashion and be on a runway.